Hi, I'm Eric Lubau, and welcome to Beyond the Belt. This is a conversation with Stephan Kesting, a black belt out of Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. Stephan is a firefighter, outdoorsman, podcaster, author, BJJ instructor, and OG jiujitsu content creator. He is currently making the rounds promoting his new book, Perseverance, Life and Death in the Subarctic, which is now available online via audiobook and in many bookstores in North America. It will be coming soon to more of Europe. Check out the show notes for where you can find it. I hope you enjoy our chat. Hey, thanks for being on.
Thanks so much, Eric. I'm happy to be here.
Tell me, what was it like for you to get your black belt?
Well, it was, I knew it was coming. And it was a little bit of a funny situation because my friend, my main training partner, is you come up through jiu-jitsu, you always have that guy, and you're always trying to kill him, and he's always trying to kill you, and you come up together, and it makes both of you better. Iron sharpens iron. So in one of these iron sharpening iron situations, my friend had gotten his black belt, I want to say December 28th, on just before New Year's Eve, basically. And I hadn't been there. I'd been working that day at the fire hall. So I showed up December 31st. And ordinarily, I'm not that mussed about promotions. I do think belts can get in the way of learning. But that being said, I was like, man, I really hope I get my black belt today. Because if I don't get it today, I'll get it fairly soon. But if we go over that New Year's Eve period, then my friend is going to always have it over me that he got his black belt a full year before me because jiu-jitsu math.
Yeah, of course.
So as it turns out, I got it December 31st, 2006. So that was, a couple of days after my friend, as opposed to a full year, again, by jiu-jitsu math.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it was a great relief to not be a year behind him. But also, yeah, I think I'd done my time. I think I'd put in the effort at that point. I'd had the surgeries. I'd recovered from the injuries. And actually coming home from that promotion, I came across a scene where there were a couple of real rubby guys who were hiding in the bushes with a bunch of women's purses that they'd clearly stolen. And my neighbors had seen them there and had called the cops, and they were keeping an eye on them. But then they started to leave. I was like, I'm not going to let them leave. So I went out there to stop them. And then I learned a lesson, which is it would have been fairly easy for me to choke both of them unconscious or knock them out or actually quite severely injure them. But to stop two, and if it had just been one guy, it would have been very easy to stop him from running away. But to try and stop two people from running away at the same time in different directions, that's difficult.
Yeah.
So there was a good lesson about, I guess, the limitations of jiu-jitsu and martial arts. And also, so at one point, one guy was trying to run away, and he ran away not very far, 40, 50 feet, but he ran to where there was a security camera. So now he turns around, he knows he's on camera, and he starts talking about my mother. He talks about the sexual things that I've been doing to my mother. He's trying to antagonize me so that I get angry and punch him in the head, because now it's on camera. Like, clearly this was a professional scumbag, a guy who had lots of experience. So I'm glad that having done the training allowed me to stay calm and avoid at least that trap of taking a swing at somebody who was trying to get it documented so that then they could turn around and charge me with assault. So eventually the cops did come and sorted it out. So that an interesting coda to getting your black belt.
I feel like that's a whole kind of, like, it wasn't just I got my black belt on that day. It was like I got my black belt, I learned an extra lesson, and it's like a real story that goes along with it. Did it?
Yeah, I could have done without the story, but there you go.
I mean, I kind of like stories, so for me, this was like icing on the cake. Did it feel like you were ready for that? Like you earned it immediately, or did it take a couple of weeks or months or roles to be like, oh no, this is me now?
I think it's difficult because in some sense, at some point in your jiu-jitsu journey, you're going to keep on getting promoted. but you've passed your physical peak, right? And there's injuries happen or life happens. So at some point, you're getting promoted just because. And I think, quite honestly, when I got promoted, I wasn't at my physical peak. I had a couple of young kids, like some basically newborn and a 2-year-old or 3-year-old in the house. I was doing a lot of parenting. I was working a lot on grapple arts, my jiu-jitsu business. I was also going to work at the fire hall. I was mega sleep deprived. So that does cut into your ability to, train as much as you would like. It would also cut into your ability to do the additional conditioning, because conditioning's super important to perform at a high level. So I was going through a local dip in my skills. So there was a little bit of self-consciousness there. But in general, I think the knowledge was there. It's one thing to maybe have a little dip in your ability to execute. But as long as the overall knowledge is there, then sharpening your skills to execute is just a question of putting in a little bit of extra time on the mat, doing the drills, doing the sparring, doing the rolling that you need to sharpen up those skills again. So there was a little bit of, I think in one way I deserve this, but in another, I wish I was I wish I was in the shape that I was when I just had one very young kid at home, because then I could put one kid into the stroller. And I used to have this circuit where I'd run for 20 minutes. On the way, I'd stop and do a bunch of push-ups and pull-ups, and then run back for 20 minutes and stop and do a bunch of push-ups and pull-ups. A very concise workout to basically work your heart, lungs, legs, push, pull.
Yeah.
And that was the only way that damn kid would go to sleep at night. So I did that a fair bit. And so there was a phase there when having a kid wasn't actually detrimental to physical shape.
Have you thought about
but
doing
once
that
you have
again
two,
now?
that becomes much harder.
Like using a wheelbarrow or something for the slightly larger version of the kid?
Yeah. Well, that particular kid really liked going fast, so I don't know. But yeah, you see the wheelbarrow conditioning. Everything old is new again, right? At some point, we're going to see the return of the chain gang fitness or ditch digging fitness, right? Ditch fit. We take a shovel and you go out to your ditch fit studio, and
they take everyone to the side of the highway. Yeah.
Yeah, or you do it with like some specialty earth that's in the studio, specialty allergen free, activated charcoal dirt or something that's supposed to be good for you.
I would absolutely try that once.
Yeah.
As somebody who did construction when I was younger, like I did a lot of digging, and so I feel like that would be nostalgic in some way.
You do you. I think I could do a good parody commercial of it, and that's been on the list of things to do. I've got a couple parody videos that I'm kind of working on and thinking about.
Do you want to share any of the other ones? Because that's fantastic.
Well, I might return to my German. If you search for German jiu-jitsu, for a while I owned the #1 spot on YouTube and on Google, and it was a parody video of what I thought German jiu-jitsu would look like.
Okay.
Then I got some. The Germans were about 50-50. 50% were like, I'm German and this is hilarious, and the other 50% were, there actually is a German jiu-jitsu, the German Jiu-Jitsu Association, and we are not amused. So
I feel like most of the people I know would find that entertaining.
Oh yeah, I definitely had some people find it entertaining. Feel free to share the historical clips that I completely created.
I will find that and see if I can like intersperse them in the video.
Yeah, that'd be a fun visual bonus. If
you watch the video, you can watch these clips these random German jiu-jitsu clips.
Yeah.
What was it like for you in the early years of jiu-jitsu? I mean, most of us have not been training since, the 90s, and you have that as one of your accolades. Like, what was different back then?
Yeah. Well, did I start jiu-jitsu in the 90s or did I start in the 80s? Because in the 80s, Danny Nosanto started sharing shoot wrestling or embryonic shuto at his seminars and saying things like, when they do competitions where they're allowed to punch and kick and grapple and submit, they're finding that most of the matches go to the ground and most of the matches end in submission. So that was an interesting piece of information, but it lacked the visual. And then really when the Gracie in Action tapes started coming out, this was another sort of source of information about that. And so we started trying to recreate jiu-jitsu based off of, a few submissions that we knew from Shuto, a few submissions that I knew from judo. My coach had done some wrestling. We'd all trained a little bit of Japanese jiu-jitsu, and the Gracie in Action 1 taught us that it's better to be on top than on bottom, and this thing called mount is a pretty good position. Gracie in Action 2 told us that if you do have to be on the bottom, use the guard. So we were trying to recreate it. I guess I formally started jiu-jitsu with a blue belt, and this was back in the day when blue belts were rare. Yeah. Like this guy actually lived in a different city and would take a ferry to Vancouver for 3 days a week. And he had a school. He rented a space and would teach, I think it was Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, several classes a day, and then go back to Victoria, take another ferry ride home. And so he was a really good blue belt. He was very conscientious. He was an experienced martial artist, but still, he was a blue belt. And there were people paying him money, including myself, every month to get his knowledge. And so there really was a whole lot less knowledge. You'd get an occasional article in Black Belt magazine, and you'd try and figure out what this armbar from the mount business is. And the only other source of information were Panther Production VHS tapes, which were, they were incredibly expensive for one. I mean, talking like $300 in $1990 for, 8 VHS cassettes, and the amount of information per cassette was incredibly low. It would be a technique, and then they'd show it from 4 different angles, and then literally one set that I bought with Fabio Gugel, it's not Fabio Gugel's fault, but basically the manufacturer decided, how we can stretch this out? We'll show the technique, then we'll show 4 different angles, then we'll have slow motion for all the 4 different angles. It was like 15 minutes per technique. So the people have commented about this a lot, but it seems like the internet has really changed a few things, in particular YouTube. Yeah. Just a few things.
I mean, you were really early to YouTube and teaching. I mean, you're kind of like one of the OGs for online content for jiu-jitsu. I mean, how does that feel for you to see what you started and see what kind of bullshit that exists now in between and everything in between?
I think it was inevitable. I think maybe I just had my finger on the pulse a little bit more. I remember agonizing about the decision to put a technique from one of my instructionals. It was high percentage leg locks, available only in VHS at the time, onto the internet, onto YouTube. Because what if I put the technique onto YouTube? Nobody will want to ever buy the instructional. As it turns out, that's not really a concern. If people like a small piece of something that they get for free, they'll often get the bigger thing and pay money for it. But going back and forth and debating this as I'm driving around town. And so, that the first couple of videos I put onto the internet were from my half guard instructional from back in the day and high percentage leg locks. And I'll say that, a lot of that material, it's not cutting edge, but it's still valid, right? There's still, jiu-jitsu is weird because it keeps on evolving, but at the same time, a lot of the old stuff mostly keeps working. And there's some stuff that stops working. And I think the stuff that stops working is stuff that stops working at a higher level. So think of the basic triangle choke from close guard that we all learned. Where basically control the wrists and you throw your hips up and you catch a triangle choke. That works great against white belts and blue belts. And it works at against high level people when they're absolutely exhausted, or in an MMA fight, when they're just been pummeled for 3 rounds. But it doesn't really work, at least doesn't work reliably, against decent people when they're not completely exhausted. So is that really a triangle choke setup that we should be doing? I mean, maybe that's worth learning just so you recognize it, but it probably shouldn't be your bread and butter. There are more high percentage triangle choke setups that you can do. So some of it's just the level of people in general wasn't very high then. So the crappier stuff or the lower percentage stuff worked more often.
Do you find that the evolution of jiu-jitsu has made it more interesting, or have you found that it makes it harder to teach, or did you just kind of stick to the basics of teaching and saying, hey, there's this variation? Like, how do you look at all of this evolution coming from hey, there was just these 1 or 2 moves?
Yes, and no, respectively.
Okay.
Worst answer ever. I actually appreciate the evolution quite a bit. Yes, it makes teaching much more difficult, and it makes your own training much more difficult, because what the hell should you focus on? That becomes a really valid question. Because if you want to do a deep dive into front headlock chokes, I was rolling this morning and we were playing around with various front headlock chokes, Darce, Anaconda, and then various sort of head and arm style chokes. That's now a massively deep game. I'll go out on a limb and say there's as much information about the front headlock and the associated attacks, the guillotine, in just that one area as there was available to all of jiu-jitsu when I started jiu-jitsu. The number of moves, the number of transitions, the number of details for that one little area. Now we go out to, heel hooks. And again, the amount of information that's there is just massive. So it makes teaching much trickier.
Yeah.
Although the approach that I try to use is like, this is the core move, and this is a pretty high percentage way of doing it. And then there are variations, and here's a couple of variations, play with that by yourself. But at least trying to, when you show a whole bunch of variations, I think it's important to contextualize, usually, this is a higher percentage option than this based on what I've seen. In terms of your own training, it makes it really difficult to, I think unless you are blessed with a photographic memory and a 20-year-old body and decades of experience in a 20-year-old body, it's going to be really difficult to know almost everything about everything. You just can't. So you need instead to have a couple of really good answers for escaping from mount. You can't know every escape from mount. You need a couple of good attacks that you can do from mount, not every attack from mount. And by an attack, I mean, you do this, and now you have 2 or 3 answers for when the guy does that, kind of paths or game plans. And just accept that you can't know everything about everything. It'd be like going to university for biology and going, man, there's so much physics I don't understand. And I have an understanding of chemistry, but I just don't understand this aspect of advanced organic chemistry. And then statistics, man, you need a little bit of chemistry, you need a little bit of statistics, you need a real good core in something, in this case, biology, but you can't be an expert in everything. It's just impossible.
I think that's a good lesson just after coming up through jiu-jitsu for a while. And I imagine that's probably even gotten more specific for you the older you've gotten. Like, hey, I can't do some of these techniques, like no more rolling kimuras for me, kind of a thing. Is that has it changed for you significantly as you've gotten older?
Yeah, I'd say the Danny Nosanto, who was a major martial arts influence on me, I've trained with him for 30 years now, said that basically every 10 years your game has to change. as a rule of thumb, because something that worked for you in your 20s isn't going to work in your 30s. Something that works in your 30s is going to work in your 40s. And that's true. So I've had a hip replacement. So that changes the level of flexibility and mobility that I have there. Unfortunately, so that's just the reality of it. So my crazy, to pick an obvious example, my crazy rubber guard days are done, finished. Now, back when I was much more flexible, I did also manage to injure myself with the rubber guard. So that actually ended my rubber guard, my tearing my LCL. That ended my rubber guard career. Of course, now the rubber guard people will jump up and down and go, well, that's because you weren't doing it exactly right. Yeah, okay. So note, if you've got a technique that's dependent on doing everything exactly right every single time, or else your knee explodes, I'm going to suggest to you that that's maybe not the best technique. Okay,
unless
where
you're
was
hypermobile.
Yeah, and then that leads to its own set of problems. Like hypermobility does lead to inflexibility, leads to injuries, but also being hypermobile leads to injuries. And I've had a hip done. I've had a kidney transplant. So that was a pretty big thing. And that basically meant that I was not doing takedowns anymore. I can't afford, now that I only have one, and my brother can only give me one kidney because he needs one for himself.
It's pretty selfish, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, I know. But if he really loved me, he'd give me both. He'd put one kidney on ice. Arguably, he is keeping a kidney on ice in his body for in case I ever need it.
That feels like the brotherly thing to do.
The issue is, I don't want to, get slammed and have that kidney damage, or head-butted, or slammed and then have the guy pile driver on top of you. That changes the techniques I do. Like, so my takedown game is extremely conservative, and I don't spar it. So that's, I try to stay current with a little bit of the grip fighting and the strategies, but I focus on the ground, right? I have enough, I think, to get by, to control somebody on their feet and maybe get the fight to the ground if I have to in a real life situation. But against a real good wrestler, screw it, I'm going to pull guard. I don't care about the stigma associated with it. You can have the moral victory and I'll keep my kidney.
Yeah. Look, I'm an former All-American wrestler. I pull guard all the time because I'm not in my 20s anymore, and some of these guys like to try to blast double, and I'm like, I don't want to deal with that. Like, I have work tomorrow. So we'll just pull guard.
Question about the blast double.
Yeah.
It seems to me that over time, that's really going to add up with wear and tear on your neck. Basically putting your forehead in the middle of the guy's chest and slamming him, basically headbutt with your forehead while grabbing for the legs. Do you need, did that ever end up doing damage to you?
I built my wrestling career off of doing moves that most people did not want to deal with. So I basically got the majority of my wrestling. I made it to the high level by ankle picks and fireman's carries and barrel rolls, or low singles. Like, I did not do anything because I was never athletic like everyone else. And so I would be in this room with these guys doing blast doubles, and then they were like, okay, now you do it. And I'm like, I don't want to do it. And so I was like, I'll just take you down this way. You're going to go low. I'll just go lower. And if I can't get underneath you all the way for the fireman, for the ankle pick, then I'll switch to the fireman's. And if you start to sprawl on me, then I'll switch back to the low single and take that and then come up. I just never did it. But practicing for them, we always had to do these neck exercises where we would, flip over and flip back. And, we had to do a lot of lifting and neck strengthening. And so the only thing that I made sure anytime I did a blast double was that I didn't lean my head into it, is that I kind of sunk it down, made sure my neck was stiff and hit it at the right angle. And if I missed the angle, I wasn't going to keep going because I was frankly worried about my neck.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. I used to do a lot of neck bridging as well. And then I reached a stage in my fairly early, I want to say in my mid 30s, where it's like, no, if I do a bridging session, not even a hard one, say 30 front bridges, 30 back bridges, I can feel it in my neck. And it's not a, oh, that was a good workout feeling. It was like, oh man, something's off. So that compressive, I mean, I'm talking with people like Stuart McGill, Chris Duffin, and Rosie Sexton on my own podcast. You know, I've come to understand that basically, you know, your vertebra, ideally, your vertebra, if they get loaded, like pressure, your vertebra should be straight. If they're not straight, then ideally, you know, it's not great, but they shouldn't be moving. But the worst thing you can be doing is loading it with compression and then moving the joint. It'd be like, you know, if you deadlift, you should deadlift with a straight back. Some people have got shitty deadlift form. They've got kind of hunched over. That's not as good, but it's better than the next option, which is changing the shape of your back as you're deadlifting. If you're going to have shitty form, at least try and freeze yourself into that form for the heavy part of the lift. It's the changing of shape of the spine while it's heavily loaded that's bad for you. And that is pretty much the exact definition of neck bridging. So it's not surprising that my neck really stopped appreciating bridging after.
I'm impressed that you did that much of it into your 30s. I mean, I think I stopped probably mid 20s. Like that's an impressive amount of fortitude.
Well, it was part of the jiu-jitsu training, right? It was part of the. So, you know, I found that doing neck harness work where there's not as much axial loading, but more of a shear loading, didn't have as much of an effect. And then I do have an iron neck, which I like, but I don't think it's quite as effective as a neck harness. So I play with those things once in a while, and generally they make my neck feel better. The basic rule is if you feel better after a workout as opposed to worse, then it's probably doing you some good.
Yeah.
But if you feel, you know, especially joint pain as opposed to muscle pain, bloody stop it, modify it, change your form, something.
How much of these workouts did you do from just jiu-jitsu versus like as part of the fire corps? Like, were you doing regular workouts for that too? Because you got to, you know, carry stuff. You got to, you know, do the mask work. You got to have the you know, carry gear. Like, how much of that workout translated?
Yeah, I sort of had the basic physical fitness program, you know, lift, depending on what my goals were, lift 2 or 3 times a week, and then do cardio 2 or 3 times a week, and then do jiu-jitsu 3 or 4 times a week, right? So that was a basic plan. That's pretty much what you need for the fire department. The thing I needed to do for the fire department at the time getting on involved a running test, and I was never a fast runner. So I really had to go deep into running and spend a lot of time on the road, just putting in the miles. And then I eventually transformed my hatred of running into a love of running. I really did enjoy it. It's just so damn efficient. But it took a while to get there. And now, unfortunately, with a fake hip, I can't do it anymore. I don't want to wear out that prosthesis any faster than it's going to get worn out already. So I miss that. I do miss running. You know, if you have 25 minutes, you can go for a 20-minute run in a 5-minute shower.
Yeah.
There's not really an equivalent. And you can do that anywhere.
Yeah.
The only time when I was traveling that I didn't do that, I ended up in a really bad part of town. I'm like, okay, maybe I should stay in the hotel gym instead of going for a run. The only specific fire department training I did, I was competing in something known as the Firefighter Combat Challenge.
Yep.
Where you have you done that?
I haven't done it, but I know about it. I know, like, so, I know some of the games and stuff, but like, please, you know, expound.
You're in full turnout gear and carrying a pack, so that's roughly 50 pounds of gear. And you pick up a hose pack, so that's a 4 foot long, about 50 pounds, and you run up 6 stories, a 6-story tower. So that's the first event. The second event is you reach over and you pull up another 40-pound hose pack on a rope. So then you run back down the tower. Then you jump on what's called a force machine, where you've got a sledgehammer and you're basically trying to drive an I-beam a certain distance. So it's hammering power. Then you run, it's called an obstacle course. Basically, you run a zigzag. Then you pre-connect an 1.5-inch hose, which is charged with water. So it starts out pretty easy, but then the further you go, the heavier it gets.
Yep.
And you have to hit a target. And then when you're exhausted, you've been going for about 1.5 minutes, you pick up an 80-pound dummy and drag that, I want to say, is it 80 feet? Maybe 100 feet?
I think it was 100 feet if I remember right.
Yeah. And then you die. I remember the fastest time I ever ran was 1:32. It was at the World Championships. And the guys came up to me afterwards and go, "Oh my God, she was so hot." I'm like, "What?" "No, the girl who was helping you take your gear off." I'm like, "Who?" And then they had it on video, and I just stumble into the tent, and this really legitimately stunningly gorgeous girl comes over to help me take off my air pack, my mask, my jacket, and I have zero memory of that. I was done, but I set a personal best. So
wasn't there also a ladder? Like you had to climb one of the ladders and carrying one of the hose and something else. Wasn't that like one of the events? Or was
no,
that...
the French fire department has some ladder games that they do.
Yeah.
And there are other events that I've participated in that have a different, that have ladder things. I think in general they try to avoid them because firefighters try to move fast with ladders, and then climbing them, there's a possibility of falling off, whereas you'd really have to screw up to fall off of a 6-story tower with the waist-high railings. It's not impossible, but you'd really have to have a bad day. Yeah,
How'd
you
you
see
get
the
into
French...
that?
Sorry?
How'd you get into firefighting?
Jiu-jitsu. I was working as a biologist, and I really enjoyed the field work in the summer, but I hated sitting in front of my computer for the entire fall, winter, and spring, writing the reports. And then gradually, as I started doing more what's known as environmental impact assessments, I'd get sent to really beautiful places to do an inventory of the different species and the different ecosystems that were there. But it was only being done so that the logging company, or in some cases the mining company, could come in and clear cut it or dig it up. So
disconcerting.
Yeah. I mean, in theory, the research I was doing was supposed to allow them to say, okay, we're not going to log this patch of lichen pine forest because that's important winter habitat for the local caribou or whatever. We're going to try not to cut down the tree that the spotted owl lives in. But it started getting a little bit depressing. So I enjoyed being out there, but I started losing faith in the mission. And maybe that's just because I worked on some shitty projects. So I started looking around, and I realized that I was doing jiu-jitsu, and the other guys doing jiu-jitsu in the middle of the days were either, as a general rule, criminals or firefighters. And, you'd had like some really pretty bad gangsters training in the same room as firefighters and cops. And they'd kind of be like the one part of the room, the other part of the room. These guys seem to have a pretty flexible schedule, right? They seem to not hate their work, but they have enough time to do jiu-jitsu in the middle of the day. I can do jiu-jitsu in the middle of the day because I'm at the low point of a project, or if I want to work till midnight, I can work till midnight. The project just the report just needs to get written. They don't care when I write it. So start thinking about that and talking to these guys and finding out a little bit more. So that I think it's shared with jiu-jitsu as well as the outdoor stuff. All three of them share this idea of working at a job that's physically and mentally and sometimes emotionally challenging all at the same time. So you're trying to solve problems with stressors, whether you're, trying to figure out how to put out this damn room that's on fire and you're hot and you're tired from dragging hose through a building, or you have me in an arm bar and I'm going, oh shit, I have to figure out a way out of here. Or you're in the middle of a rapid and it's getting bigger, and you've got to figure out how to get to shore and how to take out of the river. Those are all mental challenges that you're dealing with at the same time as physical and to some extent emotional stress. So it was very congruent.
Yeah. One of the things I always like to ask people who do this kind of work is like, do you remember your first rescue? Do you remember the first time you rescued somebody and like what that was like for you?
Yeah, but I've got a little bit of help because I ended up getting a couple of medals for it.
That was your
getting
first
flown
rescue?
Yeah, that was the first. I'd been on the job for a year and a half or so. So that was the first. Was that true? I unless you count like reviving people with CPR as a rescue, but if we're talking like burning building, dragging people out, that would.
I was more talking about the burning building, dragging people out kind of a situation.
Yeah, that thing that I got, and 3 other guys also got the National Medal of Bravery for. That was my first rescue. So
wow, that's crazy.
I have a little bit of help getting that, having that put in the memory bank.
Was that different for you than future rescues because you were like rescuing other firemen, or was it different, or was it sort of all just, hey, I'm doing what I need to do, just put my head down, do the thing, and then I'll think about it later?
It's very different when you're going to work to try and save people you know. I mean, so for me anyway, working as a firefighter requires some amount of emotional detachment, right? Like, I'm here, I show up, Granny's dead. We're going to go through our procedures. We're going to figure out if we should start CPR or not. We're going to do CPR. But I can't get too emotionally invested in it because that would be exhausting. I'll do everything I can, but to some extent, I tell myself that the person created the problem. I didn't create the problem. I'm here to try and help. And without us, the person has much less of a chance. With us, the person has a much better chance. Or if you want to simplify that further, without us, no chance. With us, some chance.
Yeah.
As a simplification.
Yeah.
So what that does is it kind of detaches you a little bit from the outcome. Yes, the main thing is, did I do the steps? Did I check for a pulse? Did I try to open the airway? Did I establish an open airway? Did I landmark correctly? Did I start compressions while you hook up the defibrillator? Did you shock the person at the right time as I'm pumping and blowing? And if I did those things correctly, then I did well regardless of the outcome. Now that gets much, much harder if you're dealing with something like a kid. Every firefighter I know hates dealing with kids, especially, badly injured kids or, God help you, dead kids. That's awful. Similarly, because it's tough to detach.
Yeah.
Similarly, if it's your people you know, whether they're coworkers or people you know, like that takes the anxiety level to 11. And that's why I think, volunteers who work in a small community, a town of 200 people, 500 people, that's hard because the odds of going to Jim's house just got much higher. Maybe it's some guy driving through town and wraps his truck around a pole, right? Then you can detach a little bit. But in a small community, most of the time you're going to be dealing with people you know, and that's harder. I work in a city that's got about 130,000 people. That should be part of the Greater Vancouver area, but Greater Vancouver is basically fragmented into a whole bunch of little municipalities. So the odds of it being somebody I know, especially given my family doesn't live there, are pretty low. So
when you rescued your first person after that, was that one of those things where you're like, okay, this is now much easier, I've now gone through the hard version of this? Or did you still not have like a expectation around it?
Well, it worked, so it was pretty cool, right? Like I, it would be, so, I mean, it's not like Rescue Me, or it's not like, some uh, TV show or movie where there's a rescue every 5 minutes. The vast majority of calls are medical calls and MVIs.
Yeah.
Last couple of years I've been working mostly in an industrial area, so there are industrial accidents. But so when the accidents happen, they're pretty severe, but they're less frequent. The most fires that we go to are false alarms, so it's this carrying people or pets. Pets is kind of cool when it works.
Yeah.
I have a I have a friend who, when he was super junior, okay, so you have oxygen. If people can't breathe, you give them oxygen. When we have the masks on our faces, you're not breathing oxygen, you're just breathing compressed air. So he dragged a dog out of a building that had succumbed to smoke. And so he decided in the heat of the moment to take off his mask, his SCBA mask, put it over the dog's face, and crank the air so that it would blow fresh air into the dog's face. So it worked. Like, it shouldn't have worked because it's not oxygen, but I guess the blowing air woke the dog up. Dog, ran off, and then he had to go back into the fire to put it out. And so now he's got this mask that's just covered with dog slobber on the inside that he has to wear.
That's great.
So he's dog slobber smeared all over his face while trying to fight a fire. So,
but he saved the dog.
He saved the dog.
That's a pretty big win.
No.
No, I think the reason I asked is because even though, I mean, I was only a fireman, a volunteer for about 4.5 years, but I think I ultimately ended up like rescuing 3 or 4 people. It ended up being like roughly one a year, which feels like a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But it was sort of impactful in a way where when I have the opportunity to ask other people about it, I'm like, how did this land for you? Because some people give me a sociopathic answer of like, yeah, I was just doing my job. It's like, yeah, but that's, like quite a bit more detached than I would expect the average person to be. And then some people have this like intense emotional reaction that just like it sits on it lands as soon as they start thinking about it. And so just seeing
both
that
can be
breadth
true.
is interesting.
It is, the person is just doing their job.
Yeah.
That's not incorrect. That is ultimately the reason that you're getting paid by the taxpayer, is to show up at their house when they've probably either had something go terribly wrong or really gotten themselves into trouble. So that's not wrong. But it's amazing how a good fire transforms the energy of a crew, right? If you got 3 guys, 6 guys, 8 guys on your crew, and you're working, the energy after a good fire, translation, nobody got hurt, and the fire went out, just working together under stress is really a bonding thing. Again, it's not that different from a jiu-jitsu club where you make some of your best friends trying to choke each other unconscious because you are kind of voluntarily choosing to enter a difficult situation. Sebastian Junger has written about this, of how adversity builds teamwork. I mean, I suppose at a small level, I mean, I've never done team building exercises, but going and doing paintball with your buddies from accounting to some extent begins to replicate this. I think it'd be far more effective to take them and like actually drop them off where they're actually going to suffer for multiple days and create kind of a story arc. But
I mean, I agree in a practical sense that would be much more effective, but having gone through military training as well, like that absolutely breeds unity, like unity through pain and shared suffering. And I think the fire core stuff is exactly that way. When you go through a fire and you've had to rely on each other and maybe something went a little wrong, but you recovered. That builds teams, that builds character, that builds trust. That's how it works, and I think you're absolutely right. But I also want to ask you, because we talked about this the other day. The other thing that really builds that kind of character is that prank culture and the sort of insult culture. Like, how does that work for you in your department? Because I know that's different for nearly everyone in some form.
Yeah. I mean, to some extent, the HR revolution has clamped down on the worst excesses of prank and insult culture. But I actually think up until I get hauled before them again, I would never waste a good insult on somebody I didn't like. I would never waste a good prank on someone I didn't like. You know, if I don't like you, and of course there are people that I don't like, and there's people who don't like me, you know, we're just gonna coexist. We're just gonna work together. I'm not gonna hang out with you, and I'm certainly not gonna spend my time figuring out how to really get into your kitchen and mess with you.
Do you have a favorite prank that you did?
Yeah. It's kind of hard to explain. Here, I'll tell you one of my favorite pranks. This I didn't do, but I was there to witness it.
Okay.
So there was a guy right when I got on who had just bought himself a new truck, and he was carefully measuring every bit of gasoline that he put in the truck, and he was so excited to be getting, I don't know what it was, like 30 miles per gallon, right? Oh, it's a giant truck, but it's such good mileage, such good mileage. I felt, and he was insufferable. So what the crew started doing is sneaking out at night and topping up his tank with extra fuel. So now he's coming back and he's talking about how he's getting 40 miles a gallon, and oh my God, like 50 miles a gallon. This is way better than the manufacturer did. So it's an elegant prank because you're not hurting anybody, but you are allowing him to make a total fool of himself in front of everybody. And then, of course, we started, well, not we, the guys who were doing this. I was too junior to be screwing with somebody's truck. Start siphoning fuel out at night. Now all of a sudden his fuel mileage dropped to 20 miles a gallon, and he's taking it to the dealer and complaining. And it was a lot of vicarious enjoyment.
What happened when you guys told him, or when whomever was doing it told him?
Yeah, he was, how dare you touch my truck? But it was also, if somebody takes that much time and effort, you have to respect it. So, yeah, I spent more than my share of time rigging fairly elaborate. So personally, I don't like it so in some departments, there's a culture of the most junior person taking everyone's gear, turnout gear, and putting on the truck for them in the morning. I don't like that. I like putting my own gear on the truck. So there was this probationary who would keep on putting my gear on the truck, and I'd tell him, like, don't. And kind of to needle me, he kept on doing it. So now I spent a good hour rigging this elaborate, like rigging my own gear with a booby trap involving copious amounts of water coming down from the ceiling. And like, if you don't touch my gear, you're not going to trigger it. So, yeah, it's again, it's done with love because I really like that guy and I think he likes me. But damn it, I'm going to teach him a lesson. And I'd like to see that as opposed to a hazing culture. Yeah, there's a learning curve, but I think hazing culture can get out of control. You know, for example, I don't like the belt whipping ceremony that some gyms do.
I hate it. Absolutely hate it. I agree. What's your take on
it? It's stupid. I mean, you're either if you're either a black belt or not a black belt. If you get promoted to black belt, like, why do you need to be whipped? I think maybe it's trying to create that that mutual suffering, but it's not mutual suffering. It's the suffering of one person. And some people, they really get, there's almost a sadistic level of glee participating in that. So
We've got a fairly large
I
gym.
have seen somebody with a sadistic level of glee come up and prepare to whip the belt, and the guy's covering up so he doesn't get hit in the face, and he comes in and he hits the guy's elbow with his hand and breaks his own knuckle. So that was kind of funny.
That's fantastic. Payback's a bitch.
Yeah, I don't know where this came from. I don't think it was part of original jiu-jitsu culture in Brazil.
I vaguely remember Chris Howder saying something about it was like something he regrets starting, but I don't know if I made that up and I hope it's not wrong, but I did have a conversation with him about it once where he was like, I regret ever having done it, but I don't remember if he said he started it or if it was just a thing that he did and was like perpetuated and he regrets perpetuating it.
Yeah.
But not a fan.
Yeah. I mean, to some extent, there's aspects of martial arts and jiu-jitsu culture which can get pretty toxic at some places, right? And it's especially the top-down control, right? Like somebody's at the top and they are the master, they are the professor, they are the sifu, even if the sensei, and really that guy's just the teacher. He's just the instructor. He knows a little bit more than you do about certain aspects of jiu-jitsu. And if we start reinforcing this hierarchy too much, then we can end up with all kinds of really crappy dynamics, ranging from, sexual abuse to instructors giving terrible medical advice. Some of the worst medical advice I've ever received in my life have been from high-level jiu-jitsu people and high-level martial MMA people. They meant well, but just because you're really good at punching somebody in the head, suplexing them, or passing the guard does not make you a medical practitioner at all.
Yeah.
Not even a little bit. I mean, I had one person, when I was dying of kidney failure, like call me in a panic. It was a Taekwondo guy. Call me in a panic that I should not do this transplant. They give you poisonous drugs when they do the transplant. Instead, I should try, I forget what herbs he had in mind, but I should take, no, man. No, I'm at 12% kidney function. Your fermented sarsaparilla root is not going to magically make my kidneys grow back. If I'd followed that advice, I'd be dead. Thanks for nothing. So that was a really high level competitor who ran a big school, and and the list of terrible medical advice received from Brazilian jiu-jitsu instructors is really very long.
I was fascinated during the pandemic how many jiu-jitsu instructors had really strong opinions on whether the virus was real or vaccines work, and it's like, okay, if you have your PhD in mRNA, then yeah, cool. I'd love to hear your opinion. Otherwise,
let's go back a step.
Yeah.
Do you know what mRNA means? Could you tell me, please, what the letters mRNA stand for? Forget having your PhD in mRNA vaccines. Please just explain to me the function, or let's make that shorter. What is RNA? And give me a couple of functions of RNA in the body.
Yeah.
It's horrible. I mean, the pandemic it's pretty easy to understand what happened in retrospect. And I think it's easier to understand, there was a tsunami of misinformation, and people who were in the kind of the performance space, whether that's running a jiu-jitsu club or musicians or yoga practitioners who made their living from regularly teaching classes and assembling people. I'll throw Tony Robbins in this. Tony Robbins became a massive spreader of disinformation and misinformation, but how does he make his money? Giant meetings of 10,000 people for a weekend.
Yeah.
People who made their money this way were much more likely to seek first explanations, explaining to them why COVID was a hoax, because that way they could keep on keeping their businesses open morally, right? It's understandable why they went that way. And then, unfortunately, once you started with this whole, they're lying to you about this, then it's pretty easy to go to, they're lying to you about vaccines, they're lying to you about global warming. They're lying to you about, I don't know, whatever the current talking points are. If you start accepting, they are lying to you, then it's bad. Then who can you trust? It's a informational nihilism. So I don't know if that's where you want to go with this conversation.
No. It's fine. I agree with you. I just think it's interesting, and actually because of some of that stuff, we talked before, and I know I do want to get to the outdoor stuff anyway, but because of that stuff, I kind of like fucked off outside of cities and was like, I don't want to be anywhere near people, and I just found myself in the forest a lot during the pandemic because I was like, I don't want to deal with any of these people, and I know I don't have to run into anybody in the mountains. And that's where I spent a fair amount of my time,
2020 and 2021 were a massive explosion of outdoor activity. And in fact, I was getting kind of mad because everyone was off work, or everyone was work at home. Translation, you can leave in the middle of the day.
Yeah.
And these mountain trails that I more or less had to myself, now overrun with people. And I found that kind of irritating. So then I had to go further afield to find some solitude.
Yeah. This is one of the things that I thought was really interesting while I was looking into how people do some of the things you do is most of what I see is people are out there for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, and you in your book were out there for 6 weeks. And I gotta know, how the hell were you alone for 6 weeks and not going crazy? Like, what level of loneliness, or what training did you do to like get away from that loneliness?
The answer is maybe I'm a psychopath, but I have never felt lonely in the wilderness. Now, I felt lonely lots of times not in the wilderness, so it's not that I don't ever feel lonely, but I think to some extent choosing to be out there is the important difference. If you're alone, if you're feeling lonely in the city, you're surrounded by people. And to some extent, seeing people, whether you're at a restaurant or going through the mall, but feeling lonely, it's kind of each one of those persons is a reminder that you are alone and that you don't have a social connection. Say you're new in a city. It's kind of rubbing salt into that wound. But when there is nobody around and you've chosen to go there, then there's a reason that nobody's talking to you. It's that, there is nobody there. Now, my starting to go alone into the wilderness was not a binary thing. It started out gradually. I mean, my first solo trip started out as a 2-person trip with me and one of my other younger brothers. I had 4 brothers initially. And he, turns out, had quite the drug addiction and didn't bring the drugs that he was normally taking. And so by 5, 6, 7 hours into it, he's getting super squirrely and created a fight out of nothing and stormed off, leaving me alone. And I was like, well, should I continue given that I'm alone? And fortunately, I'd read some books of people endorsing traveling alone and saying things like, yeah, you can go alone. You just have to be much more careful. Okay, that sounds reasonable to me. I'm going to continue alone and be much more careful. And so it ended up becoming a 2-day solo trip, 2 nights and 2 days. And it was such a beautiful experience for me. I didn't feel lonely. I felt, it was a really transformative experience. It just showed the possibility. I didn't go directly to 6-week trips by myself. I started out with a 2-day trip, inadvertent 2-day trip. And when I did my first longer solo trip, it ended up being about 4 weeks. It was right after I graduated with my undergrad in biology. I planned a trip. It was in Northern Ontario. So starting in Northern Ontario, going up to James Bay, and then coming back overland to Lake Superior. And when I headed out, I had concerns about bears, and I had concerns about whitewater, and I had concerns about running out of food. But the real concern was I would get out there, and after a 3, 4, 5 days. Big tough outdoor guy, big tough martial arts guy would be there go, I feel lonely. And that never happened. So it was a concern. But yeah, I don't know if I'm missing a circuit there, or I am fundamentally an introvert if you define introvert as where you go to recharge your batteries. If I'm run down, I don't want to go and hang out with people. If I'm run down, if I'm really tired, if I'm exhausted, I don't want to go to a restaurant and I just want to read a book in my little corner, and that's how I recharge my batteries. And if you define that as introvert, then I'm a pretty strong introvert. And maybe that helps.
I mean, that is exactly how I would define introvert. But even introverts typically need some sort of social connection after a period of time. And 6 weeks isn't a pretty intense amount of time to be alone, even for introverts. So I'm not saying that to judge. It's impressive, like wrapping my head around how one would not be lonely, even an introvert, after 6 weeks.
Yeah. I think having a mission helps, because that trip that we're talking about, I was pushing at pretty much as hard as I could every moment that I could, right? And sometimes I'd be stuck on shore just because the wind, I'd be windbound for half a day on that. That ended up being a 41-day trip. I had food for 50 days. It ended up being 41 or 42 days. On that day, one day I spent not paddling or lining or portaging or struggling because the wind was just ridiculously strong and I couldn't even go downriver on a fairly narrow river. The wind was that strong. So I think 6 weeks of that, if I'd been in a tent alone for 6 weeks, yeah, then I would have started feeling lonely. But if there's a mission, and that's to carry on and go as far as I can each day and stay safe, right? Go as far as I can safely each day, then that helps focus it, and it gives you sort of the next step, the next thing that you have to do. And you don't have ironically, for 6 weeks on your own, you don't have a lot of time to think, or rather, your thinking is more tied up with the minutia of what you're doing in the moment. Should I change sides? If I change sides now and the wind is coming from this direction, I'll have to do more correction strokes and that'll slow me down. My shoulder is beginning to hurt. Maybe I should move my hand, wrap it a 1/4 inch different around the handle. I'm getting a little bit hungry. When did I last eat? Should I put on sunscreen again? I don't want to burn. Should I go left or right of that island based on how the waves are hitting that island? Let's take a look at the wind again. Let's take a look at the storm. Is that a storm, or is that just a cloud? Your mind is going continuously. It's kind of like the, Glengarry, Glenn Ross, Alec Baldwin's character. Always be closing, ABC.
ABCs, yeah.
Yeah. Well, in the wilderness, it's ABT. Always be thinking. And you're not thinking lofty thoughts about, your role in... Most of the time, you're not thinking lofty thoughts about your role in the universe. You're thinking minutia of, my back's hurting. I wonder if I put something under my butt and raise my height by a 1/4 inch, will that change things? Same as in jiu-jitsu. We can get philosophical about jiu-jitsu. It's real easy to get philosophical about jiu-jitsu. But if we're rolling, I'm not thinking, man, this is amazing. The yin and the yang of my opponent and I struggling against. I'm thinking, he's grabbing my wrist. He's going for a kimura. I'm going to rotate my elbow in. I think his neck is open. Can I jump over and catch that in a guillotine? I don't know. It's got my leg tangled. Like, that's what we're thinking. We're not thinking, good. Struggle like this really develops character and makes you a better person. Maybe that comes after.
Yeah.
Maybe that comes on your way to class. Actually, on the way to class, you're probably thinking, here's what I'm going to try on Eric today. Yeah. That's what I'm thinking on the way to class. After class, maybe I'm thinking, damn it didn't work. I don't know. At some point, we get philosophical about it. But most of it's the minutia and the details.
So when you got to the end of the day, each day, you know, and you set up camp, you just were like right to sleep, or was there, okay, what do I do for, was there still the minutia? Was there still the details? Like, okay, what am I going to do for food? How do I set up? Is this the right, did I take care of the food the right way? Is there any bears here? Like, you know, which was that?
Yeah, there's like, just because you've set up camp, you know, that could take an hour to set up. Now you've got to cook food. I was having one hot meal a day. I'd eat breakfast, but that'd be cold. I'd have lunch, that'd be cold, with very rare exceptions. I mean, if I was windbound for the morning, I might make a soup, right? But 99% of the time, I would be having one hot meal a day. Then you know, set up your bear alarm. You study your maps for the next day, try and figure out what to do. The one indulgence I had, if you can call it that, would be writing, kind of keeping a trip journal, and then also a digital trip journal. So that was my one distraction, and that, you know, that allowed me to some extent to connect with the people I'd left behind, and also the people who were on my social media who were following that. And you know, some of them enjoyed it, and some of them tuned out. I think the thing that if I could change one thing about that trip, and I've made some adjustments in trips I've done since then, was sleep. My sleep was horrendous because I'd be going, and now it's time to sleep. And that's, you know, that's not, so all things being equal, I don't like doing jiu-jitsu in the evening. I like doing it in the middle of the day. I don't like doing it at night, because then it's going to take me 2 or 3 hours to calm down and just to get sleepy. So going, and now it's time to sleep doesn't work very well. Plus, it's other things. You know, you're in the far north, so it doesn't get real dark. Plus, you can be too tired to sleep well. You can be too exhausted to sleep well. I was pretty exhausted. And, you know, so I've made some changes since then, like a better mattress, a sleeping mask if I'm up north in the winter, in the summer when it's light out for a long time. I don't think that would interfere with my ability to respond to emergencies in the middle of the night. Trying to have a little bit of downtime, even half an hour, so that I can transition into a better sleep. And then experimenting a little bit with CBN, which is a non-psychoactive cannabinoid that supposedly helps with sleep. I think it worked. The most important thing there was testing it to make sure that it wouldn't interfere with my ability to respond to, you know, a bear trying to come in my tent, or the something where I have to wake up and be on deck right away.
Kind of like the fire that at home.
I tested it at home, then I tested it at the fire department, not when I was driving.
Yeah.
Not when I was driving the truck. You know, if you're sitting on the back of the truck, you have a couple extra minutes to wake up as you're, you know, bleary-eyed responding. And it never, CBN never affected me. And a couple times on that trip when the alarm got triggered, once by you know, a bird flying into it, and once by a caribou getting wrapped up in the monofilament line that goes around your tent, I was up instantly. So that was, sorry, not on that trip, on subsequent trips, I've woken up instantly. So yeah, tweaking your sleep is really important.
Did you find that journaling helped you reflect on the trip better throughout it? Because you said that was an indulgent you did for perseverance, but if that's not something you normally do, is that a habit that you were going to take into future trips, or did you find it to just ultimately be a distraction?
Well, journaling in this context really means almost like travelogue. Went up these rapids on the left-hand side, had to drag through forest. Great, you know, saw caribou here. You know, very procedural. And the first draft that I did of that book that you were just referring to was that dressed up a bit, right? It was like, here's what happened on day 1. Here's what happened on day 2. And then I showed that to a friend of mine, And he said, "Oh, that's really interesting. Yeah, if I liked canoeing, then I'd probably want to read this. But you've gone through this whole thing and not even talked about why you've done it, why you did the trip in the first place." It's like, good point. All right, draft 2. insert commentary about, the why and the, as opposed to just the how.
Yeah. So you did all that post facto. You didn't. That wasn't like as you were going. You were like, I wonder why I'm doing this.
But what it did was it allowed me to get into the mindset, like the having photos, having video, having a there was some of that, feeling, it wasn't entirely logistical or travelogue. There was some. So I should jump back about 30 minutes. While it's true that I've never felt lonely in the bush, I've definitely felt scared. I've definitely felt massive amounts of self-doubt. I've definitely felt worried. Like, it's not like I'm an emotionless robot.
Did not get that sense.
No. Well, if people are reading the transcript of this in the future without the deep intonation and all the levels of subtext that are being conveyed by my voice, they might get that impression.
Fair enough.
So it provided a framework to think about the development of grit and the development of perseverance and the ability, like, what tricks did I use to overcome self-doubt? I mean, for example, I one of the things I learned on that trip, because there was, right at the beginning, before starting, I was like, there's probably a 60% chance of completing this mission, completing this trip. It's long, 50 years old. This body's been through a lot. I have had a kidney transplant. The rivers could be in flood. There could be a forest fire. The distance could be too great. I don't know. I've not talked to anybody else who's done this. This used to be an ancient trade route thousands of years ago and even 100 years ago. But if the portage trails aren't clear, just getting around a couple miles of rapid could take a couple of days. If you have to, rock climb out of a canyon, haul all your gear up, carry it across through the dense forest, and then lower it down at the other side, that's a couple of days. So enough of those add up, and there's just no way you're completing the trip. So it also gave me an out. And I think that's an important thing, because you don't want to have this succeed at any cost mentality. I am going to climb Everest no matter what. I've gone to Everest. I've done all the training. I've paid my $100,000 to my bougie guide, and we're going to climb this effing mountain no matter what. Oh, there's a storm coming in? I don't care. We're going. Oh, I'm feeling like crap, and I'm at the camp before you go to the very top.
Yeah. I
don't care. We're going. I'm out of oxygen. We're going. You're going to die, right? Yep. Like this succeed at any cost is maybe, it's a useful it's a useful setting on your dial, but it's not one place you want to go too often or for too long or in too dangerous a situation. If you're doing sprints on the track, you can say, I'm going to give this 100% effort. Cool. I mean, the worst case scenario, I don't know, you tear a hamstring or you fall on your face.
Yeah.
Both of which are survivable. If you go 100% on top of Everest, that's a good way to become yet another frozen body landmarker.
Yeah.
A landmark on the way to the top. There's this balance between succeed and drive and and battle between fake self-doubt and real self-doubt. And that's a tough one to achieve. Like, what is reasonable? And now you're talking about taking risk. How do you balance that against the fact that I have kids. I can't take, excuse me, I'm just going to, excuse me, I'm overcome with emotion.
Yeah, happens to the best of us.
I have kids. So if I take risk, it's not just for me. I'm the main recipient of what goes wrong, right? If I make the wrong decision and do a crossing that I shouldn't be doing on a big lake and a storm comes up and I drown, yeah, I suffer. But I also leave a parent-sized hole in my kids' lives. So risks that I might have been willing to take in my 20s, I shouldn't be taking now. And then that changes again, right? If I'm 80 years old and they're in their 50s and they're established, and I decide I want to climb Everest at 80, 80-year-old man dies climbing Everest is not a tragedy. It's actually kind of cool.
Yeah. It's
as long as he doesn't take anybody with him.
Yeah, exactly. How much of this the mental fortitude and the, frankly, perseverance is the right word here. How much of that comes from just the mix of like the grind of jiujitsu or the grind of making sure that you have, you bleed in training to not, for the fire corps, like how much of that plays into all of this?
Yeah. I think a significant amount. I mean, two things can be true at the same time. Toughness is transferable and pain is subjective. So let's start with the pain bit. You might be used to the squishing of jiu-jitsu, right? Just getting cross-faced into oblivion. But now you go and you try and run a 10K. There's sort of pain and discomfort in both of those scenarios, but you're used to one of them and you're not used to the other. And the marathon runner who might have completed a marathon and then all his toenails fall off and the bottom of his feet are giant blisters, he's used to that pain. But now he comes and does jiu-jitsu and it's a different kind of pain. It's even true, I mean, he's fallen out of favor, but Lance Armstrong, after doing insane amounts of cycling, it doesn't matter that he was on drugs because everyone else is on drugs too, but
yeah,
he suffered while cycling. Then he went and ran a marathon, and he described that as the toughest thing he'd ever done. So the pain of running is not necessarily the same as pain of cycling. So pain is not transferable, or pain is activity specific. But toughness is, I think, mostly transferable. If you have any kind of discipline, whether that's, forget jiu-jitsu, you're a runner and you're running regularly and you're disciplined about it and you're going out and running in shitty weather and it's rainy and it's cold, but you're going out there, you're becoming tougher. And that can then be transferred across to other things. And if you now have to, you go and you do a PhD in whatever, quantum chemistry. I don't know much about quantum chemistry, but I know it's going to be difficult to get your PhD in it. Hopefully the suffering and the toughness that you built up running, that mental fortitude, is transferable to spending hours in the lab and hours in front of your computer doing the research and writing your quantum chemistry PhD thesis. But that's also true to, you're raising a kid and it's a colicky kid. And it's crying. It's crying for hours and hours and hours. That's tough. Hopefully the toughness that you built doing jiu-jitsu allows you to have the self-control to not throw that kid through the wall. Because part of you will feel like doing it. The only thing stopping you from doing that is the discipline and your toughness that gets built up. I think martial arts is often touted as a character building thing. And I kind of disagree. I don't think martial arts makes you a better person, but it undoubtedly does make you a tougher person. And toughness isn't a bad thing. It's a tool. Hopefully you can use that toughness to persevere and achieve something good.
That's really beautifully articulated. I like the way you said that. I think that's oftentimes the toughness gets mistaken for like a positive character trait only, and I think it has its people sometimes stay tough through things that they should not stay tough through.
Knowing when to quit is one of the hardest decisions or the hardest processes, and I don't have a good model for knowing when to quit. I mean, it's easier in the context of the outdoors. When does the risk of something become unacceptable? Well, it depends. It depends on a number of factors. It depends on, are you just taking risks for yourself? What are the second order effects of this going sideways? How much can you do to mitigate the risk? How much can you do you have a plan B? If, there's a difference between flipping a canoe in a rapid and your plan B is to swim to the shore, and getting caught in a giant avalanche in the mountains where plan B is to die.
Yeah.
So,
why did you, by the way, why did you end up doing a canoe as opposed to something else? Or like, did that have something to do with your hip and the kidney, or was that just like the plan the whole time?
I grew up doing a lot of canoeing, and in my 20s, I did a lot of canoeing. I did a lot of wilderness exploration. Certainly in northern Canada, it's this insane landscape. It's the Canadian Shield, basically. So think of an undulating granitic surface with all of the soil scraped off of it by the glaciers 8,000 years ago. So the time has not elapsed for soil to build up. And as a result, the waterways and the rivers and the lakes, it's just a ridiculous amount of water. And the rivers aren't, rational in the sense that rivers in England would be rational. Rivers in England, they've cutting down through sediment, and over the millennia, they've kind of made a route, right? The Rhine, you're in Germany,
yep.
The Rhine basically flows in one direction, more or less.
Yeah.
And if I put you on the Rhine, you could figure out how to go down the Rhine. I follow the current. Yeah. I keep on going the same direction. That falls apart completely in the Canadian North, because the landscape looks a bit like, if you were in an airplane high up, it looks a bit like a Jackson Pollock painting. It looks like somebody took a giant blue splashes of paint and just splashed them across the green landscape. And here's this lake with 100 arms and literally 10,000 islands. And now just try to figure out how to get off this lake. Good luck, because it's so incredibly complicated, because you're seeing the little undulations of the rock. That's an island, that's a shoreline, that's a cape, that's a headland. It doesn't make sense, because it doesn't have anything to do with the water. It has to do with, how these mountains, originally they were mountains. The Canadian Shield was a massive mountain range 1 billion years ago, got worn down to these undulating hills, and then all the soil scraped off of it. So it's the only way to travel up there is by canoe, is the answer. You could hike in a very limited number of places, but it'd be really tough going. And there are no roads, there are no paths. That's how the native people traveled up there. That's how the explorers traveled up there. That's how the fur trade moved stuff around. It wasn't until the advent of highways in the south and railways that there was any other way to travel other than canoe. I mean, Lewis and Clark took boats.
Yeah.
Mackenzie took boats. Samuel Hearne. Well, actually, Samuel Hearne, their combination of hiking and paddling. Mostly they had to carry a boat while they were walking in order to cross all the rivers and lakes that they had to cross.
That was an intense journey. I read about that.
Yeah, that A Voyage to the Northern Ocean by Samuel Hearne is one of the most amazing pieces of adventure literature you'll ever read. It's right up there with the Shackleton story.
Yeah, that's another one that's pretty intense.
It's funny how the Shackleton story, like the Brits sure do love their failed explorers, right? Like nobody died, and that's a miracle, but he didn't get anywhere near his goal. Like
I
he
have
went
no
out.
idea how no one died. That's crazy.
Yeah.
I feel like that's a good example of luck.
Sure. And leadership. Like with bad leadership, they could have all died. But with good leadership, you still need an awful lot of luck.
Yeah.
So it's this idea of detaching the right action from the outcome. You can, and this applies to the fire department. If you and I are riding on a fire truck and we go to a house fire, we can do everything right, and the result can still be that that house burns down. And we can do almost everything wrong, and that house could still be standing. Just through luck. Like on average, if we do everything right, the outcome will be better. On average, if we do everything wrong, the outcome will be worse. But it's not, one isn't a given. And by detaching the outcome from the steps you take, it kind of gives you a certain amount of forgiveness. The jiu-jitsu equivalent is this. If you have me in mount and you have my arm jacked up over my head and I'm completely out of position, clearly you're winning. And on average, if we play this tape forward 10 times, you're going to tap me out 7 times. If we're equal skill level. Okay, cool. I still have a number of steps to do. First step, get my arm back into position.
Yeah.
Step 2, start, depending on which escape you're going to be doing, like do the little bridge, get my legs free of your hooks, of your grapevines.
Yeah.
Uncross your ankles, get my legs into position. Now I start my, whatever it is, my elbow knee escape, my tripod escape, my fancy ass rolling thing that I saw on Instagram. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't mean it was the wrong thing to do. I was working the steps. What are your other choices, right? Like recovering from my kidney transplant. I didn't know if I'd survive the surgery. I didn't know if I'd ever regain enough physical function to do jiu-jitsu, return to the fire department, or ever get into the outdoors again. Those are unknowns, but it's kind of like you can control a certain number of things. In general, you should probably be hydrating. You should probably be sleeping. You should be trying to eat healthy. You should be trying to exercise. You should be following the instructions of your doctor. Like that's not high level advice for recovering from surgery, but I'd say they're the basics.
Yeah. And that's stacking the deck in your favor.
Yeah, exactly.
I've been listening to you now for a little bit, and you do a lot of stuff. How do you have like a work-life balance, or as you kind of throw that out the window?
Yeah, there is zero work-life balance. I'll say that. Fortunately, I enjoy my work. Right? It's a very fortunate when you don't hate your work. I don't hate going to the fire department. I don't hate going to shoot a jiu-jitsu video. There were times that I hated writing a book just because it was so daunting. But now that it's done, I'm pretty happy that it's done. And now this is the easy part, right? Talking to people about it and just shooting the shit with people thousands of miles away. That's kind of cool. But yeah, work-life balance, nah.
Okay.
I do occasionally have a fantasy, and my fantasy goes like this. If I had to like live the same day every day for a year, I would wake up, I would read a book, and then I would go do something physical, whether that's jiu-jitsu, whether that's lifting weights, or whether that's, going for a hike. Something, something mental, something physical, repeat. So we'll see if a rich uncle dies and leaves me his millions. And then I'll do that for a year before figuring out what my next move is.
One can only hope. Is there any kind of piece of advice that you wish everyone knew? All these things that you've done over the years? Anything you've learned that you wish everyone just got?
Wow. That's a tough question. A lot of it is the importance of developing momentum. So many people get stuck on the first step. Now, sometimes usually the right answer is to get started right away. I am in terrible shape. Well, great. What are you doing this afternoon? Let's go for a walk, do 20 push-ups, do 20 pull-ups. Let's get started with that right away. I want to ask this girl out. Yeah, well, great. Let's ask her out right now. And then you'll know your answer, right? Like, usually taking action is the answer, right? Action beats meditation. Motion and movement beats meditation. Sometimes that's not possible. There are some projects that will just take time. It took me 20 years to be in the position to do this trip that I wanted to do. With health issues, with being a parent, with my work and financial situation, there's just no way I could do it. So usually getting started with something, even if it's not perfect, is the right answer. Sometimes it's just not possible. So that's a hard thing to decipher. But when you're actually trying to make progress, and if a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, then the trick really becomes developing that momentum to take that first step. I use something, I advocate lying to yourself on that 6-week solo trip. I would often lie to myself. I use a trick that I used to use in jiu-jitsu. If I was feeling really run down and I didn't feel like training, I would tell myself, you just have to take your gi and drive to class. If you get to class and you get changed into your gi and you still don't feel like training, you can turn around and go home. And maybe I'd do this 10 times a year, and 9 times out of 10, I'd end up training, and 1 time a year, I'd turn around and go home. That's still 9 additional times that I would train. So on balance, I get more training by giving myself permission to quit. Same thing on this solo trip. I'm just going to get up and I'm just going to do 10 kilometers. That's it. I'm going to paddle for the morning and then I'm going to take the afternoon off. And sometimes I would take the afternoon off, but very rarely. Once you have momentum begets momentum. So I don't know how many kids you have listening to this podcast, but I called this the just a tip principle. Just a tip, just for a second, just to see how it feels. Right after, I'm just going to get up and I'm going to put in a couple of kilometers just to see how it feels. And then usually you end up going all the way, just to mix 2 terrible metaphors.
I think you got the point across, though. We can leave it at momentum begets momentum, but just the tip sounds like people will understand what you're saying. What are you excited for in the future?
Normally I have, this time of year, I have my summer adventure plans planned, and I've also got, a whole bunch of grapple arts and jiu-jitsu plans planned. I got to say, this year, I'm just beginning to think about those things. Getting this, anyone who's written a book understands how much work it is. There's 14. It takes time to do 14 rounds of edits and then go back and forth with your editor and your publisher and all that.
Yeah, mine took me 11 months. It was intense. I probably never write a book again as a result.
Yeah, it's like having a baby. Sometimes can be very effective birth control.
Yeah, so I've heard.
So yeah, I'm actually kind of. The truth is, I'm kind of in a bit of a limbo right now. I have to, create a little bit of room to figure out what the next thing is. I mean, have lots of. My wish list is pretty long. I'd love to make it back to Europe and do I really enjoyed, I did a bit of a seminar tour there a couple of years ago and then combined it with some, historical sightseeing. I love, I'm definitely a history buff and, not that there wasn't history everywhere, but the history in Europe is pretty well recorded. There's a lot of stuff that's happened in the Canadian North that we'll just never know about because nobody was writing it down. But if you're walking through Rome, oh, there's the Colosseum. That's pretty well described in the literature from the time. We know exactly what happened there. Look, there's the plaza where Julius Caesar was assassinated, just over there. And that's, again, fairly well described. So, at this point, that's more of a wish. I don't have a plan. And the not having a plan. So what am I excited about? I'm excited about developing a plan to tick off some of these other trips that I have, some of these areas that I want to work on in my jiu-jitsu, and some of these places of the world I'd like to see. So I wish I had a better answer for you. That I'm excited
I think that's
about
actually
having
a wonderful answer. I mean, given how prolific you are with writing and all the stuff you do, it sounds like not having a plan is a nice change of pace, and I don't think that's a bad answer. It sounds like you're going to beat yourself up over not having an answer more than I think that's a bad answer.
Well, it's a temporary state of affairs.
Yeah. So the last thing I typically say is there anything you want to promote? But we know there's a book coming out, so please.
Well, look, casual product placement right here on my shoulder. Yeah.
I'm very excited to read the rest of that. It's, I got I read a little bit of it yesterday, and I just didn't have enough time to get through as much of it as I want. So I'm gonna get a full-on copy and read the whole thing. And I assume that's available pretty much anywhere.
Yeah, it's done through. I have self-published before. I have self-published, for example, Nonstop Jiu-Jitsu, which was a book I did with Brandon Mullins, breaking down the connection between sweeping and guard passing and submissions and guard passing, those transitions between those different phases. And that was self-published, so that's only available on Amazon. But this new book, Perseverance, is published through Simon & Schuster. So it's out in North America. It gets onto the UK, amazon.co.uk, and all the other British sites in April. I think April 24th is the day that it goes live there. It's also, I went around the corner to a little independent bookstore and they had it. So that was really cool. And it's
I saw that video of you signing it and putting the little autograph first copy sticker. That was such a wholesome video.
Yeah, I was very excited by that. That was cool. So you can order it pretty much anywhere if you don't want to give your money to Bezos. Yeah, the audiobook's available on not Audacity. Good Lord, my brain. Audible, not Audacity.
Still giving our money to Bezos with that one, but yeah.
Yeah, but then you can get it on Libros, Libros. If you don't want to give your money to Bezos, you can get it on Barnes & Noble. You can order it at Indigo. You can order... Then the UK's got 1 million booksellers. If you go to look it up, on the Simon & Schuster UK site, it's amazing how many other places you can get it. And those Brits really enjoy their reading.
Cool. Thank you so much for your time today. This was such a fun conversation. I feel really privileged to get to talk to you about firemen and outdoor stuff. And yeah, this was a really wonderful talk.
Well, it's kind of a bit of a dog's breakfast, but I think there's a common theme of functioning in adverse situations, and that there's similar strategies that apply to firefighting, jiu-jitsu, and the outdoors. Yeah,
it seems like it's made for a pretty interesting life for you, finding that through line. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. If you have questions about outdoor adventuring, BJJ content creation, becoming a firefighter, or any of the myriad of other things he does, reach out to Stephan. If you find yourself near Vancouver, Canada, you can try to catch Stephan for a roll. You can find his contact information, links to websites, social medias, podcasts, and books, amongst other things, in the show notes. And as always, thank you for your time and attention.